Welcome to the video that is going to guarantee you never burn out. And if you're currently burnt out, it's going to show you exactly how to recover without stopping to work, right? I know this because I went through a very dark period not too long ago, like 3 to 4 years ago, and it was caused by a very intense burnout. So we're going to be covering exactly what I did to recover, how did I end up burning out in the first place, and what exactly is burnout? How do we need to think about burnout? Because research is evolving. Now we understand that there are more factors in play. There's a complex interdynamic about what causes burnout, and eventually how you can become absolutely bulletproof so you never have to go through this again. Now, you may be asking how a performance coach is telling me that he has gone through burnout. Am I not supposed to be bulletproof? Well, you bet I kind of am, but I had to learn how to be, right? And 3-4 years ago, I took too much on my plate that eventually, even though I was very well versed in peak performance, took me to burnout land. And specifically what happened was that at the beginning of the year, we're doing fine, business was growing, I had just run a marathon, I was very strong, I'm feeling very strong. So I committed to run another marathon, right? So the first thing I did is I committed to running a marathon. But then I was invited to participate in an Ironman. I was challenged more than invited, right? So, I decided, since I'm already running for the marathon, I'm going to start training for the Ironman. Then at the same time, one of my good friends, Francisco, invited me to try to climb an 8,000er. If you don't know what that is, there's 14 mountains in the world over 14,000 meters high in height. In feet, I'm not sure. That's like 25,000. I'm not sure, but it is very, very tall. So that's one of my dreams. I'm going to do it in my lifetime. So I said, you know what? Let's start. So I started training for climbing Cho Oju. I ended up only going to a mountain here in Spain. And on top of that, right, I was working as an academic coordinator, at AI. So AI is one of the best universities here in Spain. And then I was, of course, CEO of Self-Mastered, right? So I was, in essence, I was a coordinator because I really enjoyed the job. It was fantastic. Think of it as managing, the professors. The professors are highly accomplished CEOs of listed companies in real estate, right? So I was really having a lot of fun with this work, which is about 20 hours per week. Then CEO Self-Master, I was working about 20 hours per week too. And then the rest, maybe 30, I was training for Marathon, Ironman, and Choyu, right? So what this tells you is that there's a lot of physical stresses, right? Physical and mental, right? There was a lot going on in my life back then. I was challenging myself to run my soccer marathon while I was going and getting into swimming and cycling, which I don't enjoy neither of those. And I started training for Choyu, which is at 8,000er. And at the same time, I was coordinating professors and CEOs here at a couple of masters, and I was running the business, doing marketing and coaching mostly, right? So I was really working very hard. I had a lot of things going on, but I felt powerful. I thought that things were literally going my way. This was the ultimate test to prove my strength, to really prove to the world that I am a high performer. Let's just push further than anyone normally would like to go and see what happens, right? So 4 years ago, this is how I started the year. Now, what happened was, and this is how I eventually burned out, is that the marathon training started well, the Ironman started well, but then I got injured in my left knee. I had already booked a trip to climb the second tallest mountain in the peninsula, Iberian Peninsula here in Europe, and I also injured myself. So I had 2 injuries. So I was physically not well. And on top of that, one of the lead gen strategies that we were using in Self-Mastered dried up. So I was injured. I had to train a lot, and I didn't stop training. And one of the things we were doing at Self-Mastered didn't work anymore. So I started having 3 times the mental pressure and 3 times the physical pressure. The stresses were piling up like crazy on both the physical side and the mental side. And since things were not working out, and I was suffering because of it, and I was on top of that suffering because of my hip and my knee and my leg overall, I was in a very dark position. And I ended up having to stop all physical training and figure out a new lead gen strategy. This video is about how I was able to cure the burnout once I had the ability to take care of myself, rest, and recover. But before I tell you that, you got to understand what burnout is, because burnout is not high stress like some people would like to think. Burnout is, in essence, a state of chronic exhaustion that is caused by a multifaceted cocktail of stresses, right? Physical stresses and mental stresses. You are physically exhausted, but also mentally exhausted. On the physical side, you're prone to illnesses, you are exhausted, and on the mental side, you're tired, you're ineffective, you're cynic, you're just not a nice person to be around. There's nothing you're willing to do, nothing you want to commit to, you're just surviving. And that comes, and now we have data on this, because there's a mismatch between body, mind, and reality, right? The body is reacting to stresses in a negative way, and the mind is also not being able to curate the experiences that are going on in the right way. So after sufficient stress and wear and tear has happened in your body and your mind, you end up burning out. This is like the boiling frog story. It's not something that happens instantly. It's not an on-off switch, but instead is hundreds of a small little wear and tear that eventually at some point you snap and you go into burnout. It can take months to recover. I was luckily able to recover very quickly with everything that I did to make that happen. Now, there's a huge difference between how burnout affects professionals and how it affects entrepreneurs. And most of the research has been done on professionals. One of the biggest, I would say the leading scientist on this is I may be wrong, but I think it's Christina Maslach. And she says there are basically 6 causes of professional burnout. The first is when there's a mismatch between values, right? What he calls a values conflict. So when you are in a situation in which you're trying to live your life according to the values, but your environment is just not conducive to you doing that. Let's say, for instance, that you care about environmentalism, but then you work for a company that is polluting the Amazon basin for whatever reason, right? Well, that is going to create a psychological stressor that is hard to resolve. That can also happen if you have lack of control. You are in a situation in which you have no autonomy. Autonomy is one of the biggest drivers of peak performance because it allows us to showcase our strengths and really tap into intrinsic motivation. We need to feel autonomous. We need to feel in control control of the situation. Having an internal locus of control, understanding that we can shape our outcomes, is fundamental for peak performance. If we are in a position in which we have no control, or we have a perceived lack of control, eventually that leads to burnout, because we're in a situation that we feel we have no agency over. Then 3 is insufficient rewards. So you may be in the right place, right values, you are controlling yourself and your outcomes, but then, the outcome's just not good enough, right? If you're a professional, the rewards that you're getting for your work is just, they're just not there, right? You believe you deserve more than what you are getting. Then we have the prototypical work overload, which is what it was originally thought of the number one and also the single cause of burnout, right? Work overload is an increase in the physical and mental stresses, but it's not the only cause. Then something she called unfairness, which is related to insufficient rewards. When you are in a situation that you feel unjust, that you feel unfair, that you believe is not, that shouldn't be happening to you, that also creates a disconnect. And finally, we do have community. I think it was. Community is the 6th trigger, right? When you do not feel you belong to anything. We don't feel you belong to the place where you're working, right? When the company that you are working for does not represent your values, you don't feel friends with the people that work with you. In fact, I was reading research the other day that said the number one predictor of whether someone will stay on their job is whether they have friends or not, right? Having friends in your job is number one predictor of staying, right? So community is absolutely fundamental. Now, this is for professionals. This is not for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have a distinct psychological kind of mindset. The mindset of entrepreneur is different. And so therefore, since burnout has a huge psychological component we're going to discuss in a minute, that implies that the psychology of entrepreneurship is different from the one of an entrepreneur. And in my view, I believe what ends up happening is for entrepreneurs, is a lack of control. When you are in a situation where you're trying a lot of things, but none of them are actually working, when you have insufficient rewards for the work you're putting in, if you have an expectation about a result in business and you don't get the result, you're going to suffer. It is your mind literally creating the conditions for you suffering. So insufficient reward is a huge one for entrepreneurs. And then, of course, work overload, trying to do too many things, like it happened to me when I was doing all of those physical stuff plus working a couple of positions, right? Unfairness and community doesn't really apply to entrepreneurs, right? So these 3 is what affects entrepreneurs the most. Right? When you have lack of self-control or lack of control, let's say when you're trying everything you can on the marketing side and nothing is quite working. Well, they have a lack of control of the situation and you get frustrated because you don't know what to do. Then insufficient rewards is when you're trying too hard and expect a result to happen and that result never happens. And that is insufficient rewards. And work overload is when you're working 60, 70 hour days, 60 hour weeks, and you're literally overstressing your nervous system, right? So this is the causes of burnout for both professionals and entrepreneurs. Now, something that I want to be very clear is that burnout is not stress. It is something different. Let's create a distinction here. So burnout, stress, right? Burnout is mostly psychological, right? Mostly psychological. While stress is mostly physiological. If you're having too much stress, too many things going on in your life, and you're not interpreting those stresses in the right way, you're going to develop high stress. But it is mostly a physiological issue. It's not a psychological issue. Now, when you are burnout, you are disengaged. This is very important. This is a huge distinction. You're just numb. You don't want to work. It's just, you don't really care when you are burnout. But when you're highly stressed, you are irritable. That is a telltale sign, right? when something doesn't go your way or someone talks to you in a way that you don't like, you become irritable. Here, what you lose is motivation. This is very important. You know you're burnout when you don't care. Just literally the telltale sign. You don't care anymore. You're cynic about everything. But here, what you're lacking is energy. Is a lack of motivation, lack of energy. That's how you know whether you're stressed or also burnout. And finally, here's when you are cynical, and here's when you are anxious. Right? So burnout and stress are not the same. One is mostly physiological, one is psychological, and the outcome of that altered state of being is different, right? You know you're burnout when you don't care. When you're disengaged, you're cynical, you don't see a way out, it's just you couldn't care less anymore, right? So this is the situation that is harder to solve. Now the question is, how do you solve it, right? Well, now I'm going to be talking about mostly entrepreneurs, but it is basically about reworking the things that were not working before. So in essence, if you have, let's say, lack of control is a huge one. You had insufficient rewards, and work overload. This is the 3 most typical for entrepreneurs, okay? Cool. The easiest one to solve is work overload, isn't it? Just work less, right? Work less. Really dial down the amount of things that you are doing. Understand that most of what you are doing likely doesn't need to be done at all. Very important distinction between average performers and elite performers is that elite performers are absolutely strategic about the things that they do, about the choices they make and the path they commit on pursuing. It's not about doing as much as you can. It's not about work ethic. It's about leverage ethic. I'm going to put that here. Leverage ethic, right? How can I leverage myself, right? That is very important. The easiest way, we're not going to, this is not a video on leverage, but it's basically automate and delegate, assuming that there's nothing you should eliminate, right? This is the easiest way of put a little bit of leverage in your life. But that doesn't solve burnout, right? Because you still have 2 huge drivers of burnout. What do you do for insufficient rewards, right? If you feel that you're doing a lot of stuff and nothing is quite working, how can you solve that? Well, manage expectations. This is very important. You have to manage your mind. Expectations are decisions you make to make your life more complicated, to suffer. Every time you expect something to happen, you are tying yourself to that result. And if that result doesn't happen, and most times you have no control over that result, you are bound to suffer, bound to be unhappy, bound to perform terribly. This is a telltale sign of average performers. They set big goals and they expect to get them, and they don't get them, and they get frustrated. Elite performers, on the other side, they do it differently. What they do is that they set a goal, but they only expect themselves to master the process. The focus is on the process, not on the outcome, right? So my expectations focus on process. And then lack of control, assuming that nothing that you're doing is actually quite working, then what do you do? Well, find what works. How do I solve this? I basically buy courses and hire coaches. That's how I solve. I don't know how to do this lead generation thing. Well then, who should I hire? Who can teach me? Buying information is a fastest way to move forward in life, really, right? So this is how you solve burnout as an entrepreneur. You find what works insufficient rewards, you manage your expectations and you focus on the process. And the work overload, you make sure that you're not working on dumb stuff. You are clear on the leverage that you deploy, and you always try to do less. You try to trim away anything that is not crucial and remove the superfluous and just focus on what matters. And this will lessen your psychological causes of burnout. Now, there's a physiological side to burnout that gets addressed through rest and recovery, right? Elite performers work less than average performers. They achieve more. And part of that is because they leverage themselves better, but also they rest and recharge. The most important thing that you can do for your life, if you want to work very hard, is to also rest very hard. It's not how hard you work, but instead how hard you're able to rest, right? And everything hinges on rest and recovery protocols. And this is I'm going to share with you the ones that I do the most, right? We give our clients dozens of them in order to fully dial in their internal state. But I'm going to be sharing the ones that I actually use every day. Now, it's very important to understand that the transformation we're doing here when we're doing rest and recovery protocols is basically regulating the ANS, which is the autonomic nervous system. Your nervous system, right? Without getting too deep into the details, but there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which basically this is rest and recover, and this is fight, freeze, or flight, all right? This is rest, right? I know there's more branches, if any of you is a physician, I know this gets more complicated, but this is a YouTube video, bear with me, this schematic, this is what matters, okay? All right, so the goal here is to regulate the autonomic nervous system, and specifically activate the parasympathetic nervous system more, because that is going to induce a relaxation response, which is what we want. We want to remove something that is called allostatic load, which is the wear and tear on the body and the mind that the day-to-day stresses create, right? We have to remove allostatic load, and we do that through rest and recovery protocols. So, how I specifically did it. Well, I'm a performance coach with that, right? So I do all sorts of crazy stuff. So most of what I did was doubling down on protocols that I was already doing and introduce a couple more. The first one is, you guessed it, meditation. I was meditating. I went from 15 minutes once a day to 20 minutes twice. And every day, right? What this does is that I do it more to control the mind, but it also helps regulate stress, lessens anxiety. When you become an experienced meditator, after about 1,000 hours, your brain changes and your amygdala activation, so the center of emotion, specifically fear, is reduced. So you're able to have more control over how do you interpret the stresses coming into your life. You do not instinctually react towards them, but instead you take control. So meditation is absolutely fundamental, because every time I had a stress surge, I could stop it before it would affect the whole system, right? So meditation is the first thing that I did. I basically tripled the amount of meditation. Then what I did was cold therapy, right? Specifically cold showers. So every day I take a cold shower, but it's not fully cold. I end with cold. What I did then is I started having 2 3 minutes cold showers every single day. What this does is create more stress capacity. So this is a stressor that is going to activate your all sorts of neurological pathways in your brain. What is interesting is how it trains your body to improve your stress response. In essence, it's an acute stressor that builds capacity so that over time you're able to deal with bigger and bigger stresses. This is very important. Then 3, stretching. Stretching was massive for me. Remember that I had injured, like my hip and my knee. So I started stretching once, 15 minutes every day. Huge for me, because now we know that some emotions get bottled up in the body, especially in the psoas and the diaphragm. The psoas is an inner muscle that is in the leg but also in the lower back. And the diaphragm sits between your lungs. Those two muscles carry a lot of stress, and there's emotions bottled up that eventually need to be released. For the longest time, I had back pain, and I was only able to release it once I understood that back pain really was anger that was nested in my lower back. I had stopped stretching, so I started to stretch again, well, very intensely, only 15 minutes, but very intensely, every single night. What else? I also did HRV training. So HRV, it's heart rate variability. It's mostly breath work, right? This is one of the best longevity indicators, HRV. It signals the distance between heartbeats. You don't want every heartbeat to come within a specific time frame, because that means that you have an elevated stress system. You want to have variance so that your heart can adapt to the situation effectively. The higher your HRV, the easier it is for you to react to stresses. So what I did is specifically trained it to be able to switch between high stress and low stress effectively. That's why high HRV tells you, right? And here, the average for my age is about 60, and now I am at about 110 average, sometimes 150. Right, so I eventually was able to double the average HRV rate for my age through specific breath work, this time to elevate it, which further trained my stress response. And finally, I did forest baths. This is how the Japanese call taking a walk in the woods. So being in nature removes allostatic load, so stress, like nothing else. Being in contact with nature regulates our circadian rhythms, and our own physical and mental processes get a boost. So what I started doing is I did a 1 walk per day, about 20 minutes at the end of the day, right? This is what I started doing to fully recover from burnout. So meditation twice a day, once right after waking up and one at the end of the day. Cold therapy, one after the gym and one AM routine and PM routine. Stretching after the walk, right? After the walk, the stretching, then the HRV, then the shower, then the meditation, boom, and then to bed. And I will go into sleep directly. I also have all the protocols that I use that I picked up from NASA, but it doesn't pertain to this video. If you want me to share them with you, let me know in the comments. Right, so this is how the physical protocols, stuff that I did to cure my burnout. Well, let me tell you, if a performance coach burns out, he's going through some tough stuff, right? And this is exactly where I was 3 or 4 years ago, right? So to recap, burnout is not stress. Stress is mostly about being irritable and exhausted. Burnout is about not caring at all. It's a psychological issue mostly. The causes from professionals have been well studied by Christina Maslach, but for entrepreneurs, there's not so much research. In my opinion, there's those three things that really affect them, which is lack of control, insufficient words, and work overload. I went through a tough period in business that at the same time I was training for 14,000 meter mountains and running marathons and Ironman. So it was really tough for me to handle it. First thing I did, I removed all physical stuff, all physical kind of training for a goal, and I went back to the gym. I implemented all of these physical protocols in order to regulate my stress response and become more effective. And also, I hired someone to show me how to rebuild the lead generation strategy, reduce my workload, hire a couple people, and in essence, I started, I was like 30K a month, 40K a month back then. So it was great. It was a great experience because now I know exactly how far can I push. I hope this was useful. Let me know in the comments if it was. Any questions, ask it below. Let me know if there's any specific topic related to performance or business growth that you want me to do videos on. And if you want my specific one-on-one help to scale yourself so you can scale your business and master yourself spiritually, mentally, physically, and executive-wise, book a call with me. I'd love to onboard you into an elite community of 6, 7, and 8-figure entrepreneurs that are making waves in the world. And of course, see you in the next video.